Dr. Burnett, the origins of federal marijuana prohibition date back to the 1930s, is that right?
That's correct.
And it started with the Stamp Act?
The
of
Marijuana Tax
1937?
Act. Well, the Stamp Act preceded, but the Marijuana Tax Act was when it really jumped in.
Okay. And am I correct that that was driven by Harry Anslinger, who at the time, I guess, was the head of the U.S. Treasury's Department of Federal Bureau of Narcotics? Is that
That's
right?
correct.
And if you look at Dr. Anslinger's history, he seemed to have made claims about cannabis that were incorrect and that also targeted African Americans and Latinos as miscreants and the primary users of the drug. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I believe he said, quote, there are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
He also stated, quote, their satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana use. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
He also said, quote, this marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and others. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And this is the individual who drove marijuana prohibition that we're living with today. Is that right?
That is right.
So would it be fair to say, and I know you've done a lot of work on this, that the origins of federal marijuana prohibition are racially tinged, flawed, and stained with sort of the inhumane perspectives of the founding fathers of prohibition?
The foundations of marijuana policy are inherently racist.
Okay, no, thank you. Ms. Mosby, to sort of bring it into the modern context, the failed war on drugs began in 1971, is that right?
Yes. With
And that was
President
when
Nixon.
Richard Nixon declared drug abuse public enemy number one.
Yes.
And when you look at the Controlled Substances Act that I believe was enacted in 1970, that sort of is the foundation for the modern structure of federal law with respect to drugs and substance abuse. Is that right?
That's correct.
And under that statute, marijuana is a Schedule I substance, the most restrictive category. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that means it has the same classification as heroin and LSD, and in fact, a higher schedule than cocaine, meth, and fentanyl. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I believe that there was a commission at the time that recommended against classifying marijuana as a Schedule I drug, finding that the drug had no links to criminal behavior and recommended that cannabis be decriminalized nationwide. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that recommendation was obviously ignored. Is that correct?
It was.
Now, Richard Nixon ignored that recommendation. I believe at the time, subsequently, one of his top advisors was John Ehrlichman. Is that true?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the fact that Ehrlichman has recently, or in his latter years, admitted that the war on drugs was created specifically to target Black Americans?
That is correct.
In terms of how mass incarceration has devastated families, individuals, communities, having gone from a place where there were less than 100,000 people incarcerated about 50 years ago to more than 2.3 million. You've been a prosecutor who's promoted public safety, but done it in a strong and an ethical way, anchored in social and economic justice. Could you just give us a perspective on why decriminalization of marijuana or taking a different approach is in the best interest of both public safety and social, economic, and racial justice?
So it's in the best interest of racial justice, because racial justice is a systemic fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in the equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. And what we've seen through the enforcement of this war on drugs is that it has been a war on Black and brown people. And it's specifically the discriminatory enforcement against Black poor Black and brown people. And so from the perspective of criminal justice, we've criminalized what should have been a public health issue all of this time. And in light of the fact that these collateral consequences have had negative impacts, not just on the individuals, but on the communities that these individuals come from. These debilitating social, political, economic debilities are something that have not just marginalized the individual, but have marginalized communities. And I see this each and every day as a prosecutor in one of the most impoverished cities in the nation.
Well, thank you for your leadership. The war on drugs has been a failure. It's been a stain on our society, our democracy, our country. It's time to end it. We can begin by dealing with marijuana decriminalization. I yield back.